Hi, welcome to Feed Your Soul. I am Melinda, and you are watching a series on the Torah portions. This is where believers in Jesus, Yeshua, Messianic believers or Christians, um, come to learn better about the foundations of our faith, right? The idea is to dive in deep to the front of the book so we can know the back of the book better than we do. This takes an entire year. So if you're new here, please go to the playlist entitled Torah Study and get caught up. Start in Genesis and just fall in love with the Word of God by reading it slowly, line by line, and just seeing the heart of the Father in the whole thing. This week's portion is called Mishpatim, which is the Hebrew word for rules or judgments. And it is the perfect section to really see the heart behind the commandments, right? Or the instructions of God. Because these commandments from our Creator were given for our good. They were given to help us know how to love our neighbor, how to love the Lord. It puts a definition behind something kind of vague, like treat others well. Well, who defines what well is, right? Who defines what love is? God does. And so knowing his instructions helps us put a definition to loving your neighbor and loving the Lord your God. So we are picking this up. It's right after the Ten Commandments have been revealed from the mountain to the people. And this is more instructions that Moses is giving the people that has come from God. Moses is leaving the people with these instructions before he goes up the mountain for the 40 days. Kind of like so they have some reminders about how they're expected to behave and live while Moses steps away for a time to be with the Lord. So this portion takes place in Exodus 21 through 24. And then we're going to look at a pairing in Jeremiah, which directly relates to some of what we talk about here in Exodus. And then Matthew 5, the second section in Matthew, verses 27 through 48. It's the Sermon on the Mount. Again, directly relates to this original Sermon on the Mount, right? I would say this is Sermon 1.0 on the Mount. Okay, we are in Exodus 21. We're probably going to stop a little bit more frequently than we usually do just to talk about these individual statutes, rules, mishpatim, as we go, because there are so many here. So, Exodus 21. Now, these are the rules that you shall set before them. When you buy a Hebrew slave, an Eved or male servant, he shall serve 6 years, and in the seventh he shall go out free for nothing. If he comes in single, he shall go out single. If he comes in married, then he shall go out with his wife. If his master gives him a wife and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out alone. If the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him to the Elohim, which that's what it says in the Hebrew. Some versions say God, some say judges, but just we've talked about this previously. Elohim has many meanings, doesn't necessarily mean he was brought to God, but probably the elders that Moses has set up at this point. So judges. Um, but his master shall bring him to Elohim, and he shall bring him to the door or the doorpost. And his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall be his slave forever. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, but I've crossed that out, and it's a different word than the one for the male servant. It's Amma or a handmaiden. She shall not go out as the male slaves. If she does not please her master, who has designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has broken faith with her. If he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her as with a daughter. If he takes another wife to himself, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, or her marital rights. And if he does not do these 3 things for her, she shall go out for nothing without payment of money. So we're going to pause a minute because there's a lot just in that first slide. So the 7th year is a Sabbath year, and we've talked about 7 before a few times, how significant a number it is in the Bible. The 7th day, of course, the Sabbath day that was set back at creation. It was a pattern for Sabbath years. Every 7th year is a Sabbath year, and multiple things happen on that year. The land resting, one of them is that the male servants should go free, and just the men, and there's a reason for that. So the male servants and the female servants, the word is not just a male version and a female version of the same word or same root word. They're very different words. And so whatever these words mean, they mean something different, right? And so sometimes it's hard to really get the true and in context meaning of a word. But the Eved was this male servant, but Amma is a handmaiden. The female servant who winds up getting sold into somebody's household. Oftentimes, the daughters, a father selling his daughter into a household, um, is about escaping poverty, is about getting her into a household that maybe he would otherwise not have been able to. She would not be able to marry well. It was a way to take care of those in unfortunate circumstances. That's what the male servant, if you're a Hebrew, right? This is about Hebrews um, allowing other Hebrews to work for them as like a bonds workman type of a thing. But women, they would become handmaidens and they could become the master's wife or the wife of a son in the household, and she would be treated as a wife, a true wife, or as a daughter. So she becomes part of the family, right? And so I just want to pause here for a few minutes to talk about the significance of this section of scripture. This section actually is the foundation of the rules of marriage in Hebraic culture and still in many Jewish populations today still really go by these being the foundational expectations for marriage. So if an amma, right, the wife that comes into the family as a handmaiden, is guaranteed these things in marriage, that her food, clothing, marital, conjugal rights, that actually means. So, like the promise of love and affection and children. Um, if these things aren't provided for the Amma and she has the right to go free, I think the idea is how much more would that apply to a wife who didn't come in as a handmaiden, right? So these are very protective. The woman will be treated like a daughter or a wife. She will be loved and taken care of. And she doesn't go free in the 7th year, not because she like to deny her freedom, but because she would go out to be living independently. Or she would have to go back to her father's house and kind of start this process over again of finding a husband, a household to be a part of, right? Um, that was the custom. The sons stay as part of the family, and the daughters tend to go and become part of the son's family. So it's a protective law. And I know it's hard for us to see and hear that sometimes in our 21st century um, viewpoint, right, from our perspective. But not only is this protective around the daughters, um, it is also very edifying to understand the foundational idea of what marriage was supposed to look like. So we're going to talk later in this portion in the New Testament about what Jesus says about lawful divorce. But you have to remember, he is speaking with this as a foundation. And we're going to talk just for one more minute about this because I have been in conversations in the very recent past with women, even who want to say that the only reason that a woman could leave a marriage was because of adultery. And that's taking some of those New Testament scriptures and twisting them a bit. Because right here, God is saying a woman is to be provided for, cared for. She is to be provided food and clothing and care and at least the possibility of children to mother children. Mothering sons is also a very protective thing for a woman because the sons are going to be who will help take care of her in her old age. So these laws were about providing for the people who are at risk, right? Providing for those who have less power in the dynamic. And you're going to see that as a theme all through this. So I want my followers, people who are using these videos in any kind of study format to really understand God's heart for marriage and his protection for his daughters. Because if you or someone you love is in a dangerous relationship, a relationship where there is abuse, a dangerous relationship where there is not provision, right? A relationship that isn't maybe adulterous, but is destructive. That God is not expecting you to stay in destruction, right? He does not expect his daughters to be abused in order to keep a marriage together. And I am not a marriage counselor, but what I want people to understand is this premise here on your screen. Marriage came with expectations. And when we don't know the front of the book, we can lose sight of the culture the back of the book is speaking into. Okay, so God wants protection for those who are vulnerable. And in this culture, women were absolutely vulnerable. Okay, we could do a whole video just on the subject. I probably will at some point. Put your thoughts about this, questions about it, things to discuss about this subject. Please put them in the comments because I'd love to hash it out with you. All right, back to Exodus 21, verse 12. Whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death. But if he did not lie in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place to which he may flee. Think about that as like a sanctuary city we hear about later on, a little bit more in depth for manslaughter. But if a man willfully attacks another to kill him by cunning, you shall take him from my altar that he may die. So murder, different than manslaughter. Whoever strikes his father and mother shall be put to death. Whoever steals a man and sells him, and anyone found in possession of him shall be put to death. Whoever curses his father or mother shall be put to death. When men quarrel and one strikes another with a stone or his fist, and the man does not die but takes to his bed, then the man rises again and walks out the door with his staff. He who struck him shall be clear, like no real damage. He'll be clear. Only he shall pay for the loss of time, and he shall have him thoroughly healed. When a man strikes his slave, male or female, with a rod, and the slave dies under his hand, he shall be avenged. But if the slave survives a day or two, he is not to be avenged. For the slave is money. Just an aside, and I'm not going to go through this in depth in this portion, but there is a more in-depth laws about what happens if a servant or slave is from outside the Hebrew camp, and that seems to be what this verse is talking about here. We get to that in Leviticus. We have to remember as we're reading, times were different. Times were different. And God does not say, thou shalt have servants and slaves. But he does say, if you are going to, here are the protective parameters around it. When men strive together and hit a pregnant woman so that her children come out, but there is no harm, the one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall impose on him. So before we move on, just to point out here, if a person strikes his father and mother, like his father and his father's wife, if a person curses his mother or father, they'll be put to death, whether striking or cursing them. And again, I've had this discussion, I think it was last week, with a woman who was adamant that you couldn't, that there was no premise, there was no provision for divorce or a woman leaving a marriage within domestic abuse, that she could separate or she could get herself to safety. But we can extrapolate the father's heart, right? We just talked about the woman was promised provision. And here, if you strike your father or mother, you're to be put to death. If you curse your father or mother, you're to be put to death. Um, we go into a whole section about servants. If you harm them, you need to make restitution or they get to go free. A woman, a wife, would be given the same treatment, right? There would just be an expectation, right? If you can't harm your servant, you can't strike your mother or father, there's no reason you'd be able to strike your wife. So we can see the father's heart behind these commandments, and we need to be careful not to say, well, it wasn't worded exactly like this, so where there is silence, we need to look at the Father's intentions and his heart, and we can extrapolate from other commandments. Remember, context is key. And also, if you can't hit your servant, if you can't strike your father or mother, you can't strike your wife either, right? Or the other way around, right? Abuse in these relationships is not okay, no matter where it's coming from. There just tends to be a higher danger, right, when it's coming from the husband to the wife. And so I have a heart for women in scary places and then being counseled to just stay and pray and be that witness to their husband when they were promised by the word of God to be provided for, cared for, loved, treated as a daughter and a wife, right? Yeah. So, okay, again, a whole video. We could do a whole video on this. When men strive together and hit a pregnant woman so that her children come out, but there is no harm, the one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall impose on him, and he shall pay as the judge determines. If there is harm, then you shall pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. When a man strikes the eye of his slave, male or female, and destroys it, he shall let the slave go free because of his eye. If he knocks out the tooth of his slave, male or female, he shall let the slave go free because of his tooth. When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall not be liable. But if the ox has been accustomed to gore in the past, like if this is a pattern, and its owner has been warned but has not kept it in, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and the owner shall also be put to death. If a ransom is imposed on him, then he shall give for the redemption of his life whatever it is imposed on him. If it gores a man's son or daughter, he shall be dealt with according to the same rule. If an ox gores a slave, a male or female, the owner shall give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. When a man opens a pit, or when a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restoration. He shall give money to its owner, and the dead beast shall be his. When one man's ox butts another so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and share its price, and the dead beast also they shall share. Or if it is known that the ox has been accustomed to gore in the past, and its owner has not kept it in, he shall repay ox for ox, and the dead beast shall be his. So it's really, you're responsible for what your animals do, right? Responsible if you dig a hole and someone falls in it, you're responsible to your neighbors to keep them safe to the best of your ability. And again, with that idea of you're responsible to your neighbor to the best of your ability. So if a woman is hit, harmed in some way, and she is pregnant and her baby comes out, and there's this phrase here, but there is no harm. The one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall impose on him, and he shall pay as the judge determines. Okay, so this is a hotly debated verse. You may be aware of that or not. It's that phrase, but there is no harm. Who is that referring to? Is it the woman or is it the baby? So the issue is that there are two words in the Bible that refer to childbirth. One is this coming out, is what's used here, right? We have a word for go out, come forth, exit. That is the word that is used here. It's yitza. And it has a connotation of kind of neutral to positive. Things are coming forth, right? But there's another word that is used for the word miscarriage when a baby dies and is born. When you lose the pregnancy, right? And that is the nephal. Um, that's miscarriage. And it is used for the word miscarriage. That's how it's translated in the Bible. And here it's not that, right? Um, so here we have a set of instructions on what happens if you harm a baby who has not been born yet. And again, people will debate this and they'll say, no, they're not even talking about if the harm came to the baby. They're only talking about if the harm came to the mother. But I would push back on that because of the different words. If they wanted to use the word for if the baby is miscarried, but there is no harm to the woman, that would be a different thing than saying if the baby comes out, but there's no harm to the baby, just that the child is preterm, a little premature, there'll be a fine, right? Um, but if the baby dies, that's when we are told there will be eye for eye, tooth for tooth, life for life. And again, to not just look at one phrase or one hard to translate ancient word, but to know the heart of the Father who protects the vulnerable, who gives voice to the voiceless, who is a lover of life and not death, who personifies, gives personhood to babies in the womb all throughout the scripture, saying, I knew you in your mother's womb. You were knitted together in your mother's womb. We have Psalms and verses in Jeremiah that talk about um, being being known before you're born. We have John the Baptist, right? When he is in the womb, in Elizabeth's womb, he responds to Jesus being unborn in Mary's womb, right? And he has talked about leaping for joy in the womb. There's personhood given to the unborn in the Bible, and God is a God who protects the vulnerable. We know his heart, and so we don't need to debate about singular Hebrew words and their meaning when we know the heart of the Father. So, okay, and then this next section here in Exodus 21 talks about life for life, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, right? It's basically saying that the punishment will be equal to the crime. This section, though, this verse gets taken out of context often, even by Gandhi, right? Gandhi said, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. But if you look in context, this what is being said here is not necessarily literally eye for an eye. It is saying that the punishment should fit the crime, because the next set of verses talks about if a man strikes his slave and causes him to go blind, or he loses an eye, the the consequence isn't that the master will get blinded or lose an eye. It is that, or if he knocks out a tooth, he does not then get a tooth knocked out, but that the slave shall go free. Like, you're not going to respect the personhood of this person in front of you. You don't get to have them in your household serving you as a bondsman, as a servant. So, right, it's not that everyone's blind. It's that there is a right and good sense of justice here, that the punishment is not too harsh, because if you know the Code of Hammurabi, there's some crazy consequences, like if a surgeon makes a mistake, uh, his hands get cut off. There is, and women are outright, told that they don't have rights and they're considered property in the Code of Hammurabi. So There are some similarities in that ancient law text to the text of the Torah, but there are also some vast differences because it is about leveling out the consequence so that it matches the crime. Not too little, but also not too harsh. So eye for an eye is not necessarily, it was not, this verse was not written in a like, no matter what happens to you, you will be able to, vengeance. It's not about taking vengeance in the same way, but that the punishment matches the crime in severity. Again, the slave goes free if his eye gets knocked out or his tooth gets knocked out, right? We're not going and knocking out other people's tooth or blinding people. So it's important because I think even Gandhi got that wrong. Okay, so we are now in Exodus 22. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and kills it or sells it, he shall repay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. If a thief is found breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there shall be no blood guilt on him. But if the sun has risen on him, there shall be blood guilt for him. He shall surely pay. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the stolen beast is found alive in his possession, whether it is an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall pay double. If a man causes a field or a vineyard to be grazed over, or lets his beast loose, and feeds it in another man's field, and feeds it in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best in his own field and his own vineyard. If a fire breaks out in thorns, so that stacked grain or the standing grain or the field is consumed, then he who started the fire shall make full restitution. If a man gives to his neighbor money or goods to keep safe, and it is stolen from the man's house, then if the thief is found, he shall pay double. If the thief is not found, the owner of the house shall come near to Elohim and show whether or not he has put his hand to his neighbor's property. For every breach of trust, whether it is for an ox, a donkey, or a sheep, or a cloak, or any kind of lost thing, of which one says, "This is it," the case of both parties shall come before Elohim. Um, so judge or God, depending on context. The one whom Elohim condemns shall pay double to his neighbor. If a man gives to his neighbor a donkey or an ox or a sheep or any beast to keep safe, and it dies or is injured or is driven away without anyone seeing it, an oath by the Lord shall be between them, both to see whether or not he has put his hand to his neighbor's property. The owner shall accept the oath, and he shall not make restitution. But if it is stolen from him, he shall make restitution to its owner. If it's torn by beasts, let him bring it as evidence. He shall not make restitution for what is torn. So, if someone is holding on to your animal to keep safe, if something happens to him, there's got to be proof, is basically what there is. There's got to be proof of negligence. Otherwise, you have to take your neighbor's word for it. So if you, and so there's a little difference here. If you give the thing to your neighbor to keep safe, he's like doing you a favor. But if a man borrows anything of his neighbor and it is injured or dies, and the owner not being with it, he shall make full restitution. So if you borrow something, you're taking on the responsibility, then you do have to replace it or make restitution. If the owner was with it, he shall not make restitution. If it was hired, it came for its hiring fee. If a man seduces a virgin who was not betrothed and lies with her, he shall give the bride price for her and make her his wife. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money equal to the bride price for virgins. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Whoever lies with an animal shall be put to death. Whoever sacrifices to any god other than Jehovah alone shall be devoted to destruction. So this section here, just on the seducing a virgin, this language here is consensual. There is a section that talks about unconsensual relations and the consequence for that. So just to not get it twisted, that's later on. We'll talk about it when we get there. But this is about if people decide, a man and a woman decide to lie together, but they are not betrothed. They are not set to be married. That they will be set to be married now. That, the man will pay the bride price and make her his wife, because trying to marry off a woman in this culture who isn't a virgin is difficult. And that means it's going to be difficult for her to have care and to have children. Um, and I'm not speaking to this as being a right or wrong idea, like a woman's value comes in her virginity. I do not believe that. But this was the context in which um, people are living, right? And so we have to think in that context, this audience. So it's a protective measure. Okay, you do this outside of marriage. Well, now you're going to be married. But there are levels of consent here. She has to consent, like the lying with has to be consensual, or else there's a whole other set of consequences. And the father has to give consent. And again, that sounds harsh to us 21st century modern women, that the father has to consent, but he is responsible for her, right? And so it's another level of protection. If he says this man isn't going to be okay to provide for you, he can actually keep his daughter in his household, and she doesn't have to be married to this man. So these are protective ideas. Um, and then this other word phrase down here, it's different than being put to death, shall be devoted to destruction if you sacrifice to another god. Um, we talked about in the Ten Commandments, that's considered, first of all, it's breaking that commandment of do not have any other God before Jehovah, but it's, and do not have any idols. But it's also akin to adultery, right? We looked at the connection between the sets of commandments, and the devoted to destruction is beyond just putting a singular person to death. It's like the whole household, like his possessions. He's like he didn't exist. Yeah, it's pretty intense. Okay. Verse 21. You shall not wrong a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. You shall not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. If you mistreat them and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will burn. And I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widows, and your children fatherless. If you lend money to any of my people who is with you, any of my people with you who is poor, you shall not be like a money lender to him, and you shall not exact interest from him. If ever you take your neighbor's cloak in pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. For that is his only covering, and it is his cloak for his body. In what else shall he sleep? And if he cries to me, I will hear him, for I am compassionate. You shall not revile God or curse a ruler of your people. It says you shall not revile Elohim, so that might be the judges or the rulers of your people. Either way, you shouldn't curse God, and you shouldn't curse the judges that are ruling over you. You shall not delay to offer from the fullness of your harvest and from the outflow of your presses. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. You shall do the same with your oxen and with your sheep. 7 days it shall be with its mother, and on the 8th you shall give it to me. You shall be consecrated to me. Therefore, you shall not eat any flesh that is torn by beasts in the field, and you shall throw it to the dogs. God reminds them again, over and over again, that they were once sojourners in Egypt, and that they need to treat those who are vulnerable well. So do not treat a sojourner, meaning like a foreigner, an immigrant, someone who is newly in your camp, in your nation, in your people. Do not treat them poorly, because you were sojourners in Egypt, right? And the widow and the orphans, God was pretty serious about protecting the vulnerable. Again, a widow and orphans don't have the protection of a father or a husband in this very patriarchal society. They are vulnerable. They are to have your utmost protection. If you harm them, God said, I will make your wife and a widow and your children orphans. He will blot out the people who harm the vulnerable. And this is the Father's heart over and over again. He cares about those who are less powerful, in the lower end of the power dynamic, right? He cares about the vulnerable. And then, from caring for orphans and widows, all the way to don't make money off of someone who needs a loan. Remember, like loans are so commonplace in the 21st century Western world. Everyone just about gets a loan for a mortgage. Many people get loans for cars. Many people get loans for college, right? It's pretty commonplace that like every person at one point in their life will get a loan, and we pay interest. And sometimes we pay a lot of interest. And that's not to even begin to talk about credit cards, which is a whole nother problem. But here in the word of God, God is saying if someone doesn't have enough money to purchase something and they need to borrow from you, you don't need to be making money off of their need. You may not charge them interest. Find that fascinating. Interest is looked at as taking advantage of another person's need. So, Exodus 23, you shall not spread a false report. You shall not join hands with a wicked man to be malicious, to be a malicious witness. You shall not fall in with many to do evil, nor shall you bear witness in a lawsuit siding with the many, so as to pervert justice. Nor shall you be partial to a poor man in his lawsuit. If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall bring it back to him. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying down under its burden, you shall refrain from leaving him with it. You shall rescue it with him. So, verse 4 here, your enemy's animal, if it has escaped, you bring it back to your enemy. Not your neighbor, not somebody who's neutral, who you don't really know. This is your enemy, right? So someone you really don't get along with, you're going to return his property to him. Or if you see his animal struggling under its own burden, this is saying if an animal is in trouble, you're going to help that animal, even though it belongs to your enemy. And so just keep this idea in mind. The caring for your enemy is not a new idea in the New Testament. When Jesus says, love your neighbor, he didn't make that up out of thin air, right? We have to, again, look at the heart of the commandments. Okay, verse 6. You shall not pervert the justice due to your poor in his lawsuit. Keep far from a false charge and do not kill the innocent and righteous. Do not kill the innocent. Protection over the innocent. For I will not acquit the wicked, and you shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the clear-sighted and subverts the cause of those who are in the right. You shall not oppress a sojourner. Again, reiterated. You know the heart of a sojourner, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. For 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its yield, but the seventh you shall let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave, the beasts of the field may eat. And you shall do likewise with your vineyard and with your olive orchard. 6 days you shall do your work, but on the seventh you shall rest, so that your ox and your donkey may have rest, the son of your servant woman, your Amah, may rest, and the alien may be refreshed. So Sabbath isn't just about you resting from your work. When you rest, it means your whole household, even the community can rest. Your animals may rest. It's a pretty important thing. Seventh day, seventh year. These are important patterns. They show the heart of our Father. Okay, 13. Pay attention to all that I have said to you and make no mention of the names of other gods, or let it be heard on your lips. 3 times a year you shall keep a feast to me. You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread, as I commanded you. You shall eat unleavened bread for 7 days at the appointed time in the month of Aviv. For in it you came out of Egypt. So that's the first of the months, Passover time. None shall appear before me empty-handed. You shall keep the Feast of Harvest, which is Shavuot, Pentecost. It's the twofold feast, right? It's the Feast of Weeks, and it's also the first fruits of your labor, of what you sow in the field. You shall keep the Feast of Ingathering, or Sukkot, Tabernacles, at the end of the year, when you gather in from the field the fruit of your labor. 3 times a year you shall, all your males shall appear before the Lord your God. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with anything leavened, or let the fat of my feast remain until the morning. The best of the first fruits of your ground you shall bring into the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. We can pause there for a minute. You can see that this, you shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk, kind of attached to the commandments about sacrifice and worship of God. It seems that this is a phrase modern day Jews will walk out this commandment by not mixing milk and meat, right? And if you go to an Orthodox Jewish household, a lot of times they'll even have separate dishes for these two items in order to walk out this commandment. This commandment was likely about some occult practice, some pagan nation and what they did. It was like a ritualistic. So I don't think that the literal way to walk out this commandment is to never combine dairy and meat, but I do have much respect for people saying, like, this is how I can honor this commandment in my household, that I will never have milk and meat together. So I never cook them together so that I can make sure, even if it's symbolically, that um, we're honoring this commandment. I do think it's probably adding a little bit to the law there by saying you can never have meat with dairy, but you know, looking for ways to honor the commandments in your own household and in our 21st century life, I think is commendable. But just understand that's adding to the law there. Okay. Behold, I send an angel before you to guard you on the way and to bring you to the place that I have prepared. Pay careful attention to him and obey his voice, and do not rebel against him, for I will not pardon your transgressions, for my name is in him. The angel, the messenger, has the name of God in him. He speaks for God. But if you are careful to obey his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. When my angel goes before you and brings you to the Amorites and the Hivites and the Perizzites and the Canaanites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, I will blot them out. Did I say Hivites twice? It's Hittites and Hivites. You shall not bow down to their gods, nor serve them, nor do as they do, but you shall utterly overthrow them and break their pillars in pieces. You shall serve Jehovah your Elohim, and he will bless your bread and your water, and I will take away the sicknesses from among you. None shall miscarry or be barren in your land. I will fulfill the number of your days. I will send my terror before you and throw confusion into all the people against whom you shall come, and I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you, and I will send hornets before you, which shall drive out the Hivites, the Canaanites, the Hittites from before you. I will not drive them out before you in 1 year, lest the land becomes desolate and the wild beasts multiply against you. Little by little, I will drive them out from before you until you have increased and possessed the land. And I will set your border from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines and from the wilderness to the Euphrates. For I will give the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and I will drive them out before you. You shall make no covenant with them and their gods. They shall not dwell in your land, lest they make you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare against you. The little by little, the driving them out little by little is fascinating to me. Meaning, if like the people who were in the land were just gone, right, at once, that the land would be overtaken by wild beasts and then not be inhabitable because there weren't enough Israelites to be able to settle enough of the land, and it would be taken over by, I don't know, lions, um, but animals that are you're unable to live with, right? Because they would be dangerous to live with, wild beasts. So I find that kind of fascinating. And you also see here the borders that of the promised land, right? It's much bigger than modern day Israel, all the way from the Red Sea down here at the bottom. The Mediterranean Sea would be the Sea of the Philistines, over to the Euphrates and the desert, the wilderness. If you remember back to one of our videos on, I think it was Noah, it's after the flood, um, where we see in Jubilees why exactly these people have settled in the land. The Canaanites are there, like why they're there. It's because Canaan settled there and he wasn't supposed to, right? In Jubilees, it describes how Noah gives his sons a lot, like assigns them land by lot. And this section of land was supposed to go to Shem, but Canaan settled there. And his father Ham was like, no, don't do that. It's going to be a bad idea. But he did it anyway. And this was not the land that God had set aside for Canaan, for Ham's descendants. It was for Shem and Shem's descendants. And Shem, one of Noah's sons, that's where we get the word Semite, right? Shemite. So the Semitic people, this was the land for Shem's ancestors. So God was going to remove the unrightful owners or the unrightful inhabitants of this land, but he was going to do it little by little, and they needed to, in the meantime, honor God and what he's saying for them to do, how he is asking them to behave, and that they should not be distracted by the false gods being worshipped in that place. We know that they don't really heed these warnings. And this map, the red and the blue, is the journey of Abraham from the land of Ur to Shechem. Just the map I used. Okay, last chapter in this portion, Exodus 24. Then he said to Moses, come up to Jehovah, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel, and worship from afar. Moses alone shall come near to Jehovah, but the others shall not come near, and the people shall not come up with him. Moses came and told the people all the words of Jehovah and all the rules. And all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words that Jehovah has spoken, we will do. And Moses wrote down all the words of Jehovah. He rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the people of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to Jehovah. And Moses took half the blood and put it in basins, and half the blood, and he threw it against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, all that Jehovah has spoken, we will do, and we will be obedient. And Moses took the blood and threw it on the people and said, behold, the blood of the covenant that Jehovah has made with you in accordance with all these words. Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel. There was under his feet, as if it were a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heavens for clearness. And he did not lay his hand on the chief men of the people of Israel. They beheld God and ate and drank. Jehovah said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and wait there, that I may give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commandment, which I have written for their instruction. So Moses rose with his assistant Joshua, and Moses went up to the mountain of God. And he said to the elders, wait here for us until we return to you. And, behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever was in a dispute, let him go to them. When Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain, the glory of Jehovah dwelt on Mount Sinai. And the cloud covered it 6 days. And on the seventh day, he called to Moses out of the midst of the cloud. Now the appearance of the glory of Jehovah was like a devouring fire on top of the mountain, and in sight of the people of Israel. And Moses entered the cloud and went up on the mountain, and Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. There's this image of seeing a vision of God, maybe just his feet walking on the streets paved with sapphire, right, in heaven. I do think this was probably just a vision, like no one has seen God, so they were given like this peek into what was happening, maybe just God's feet, right? We can't see God's face and live. Something about our mortal selves cannot be in the presence of the fullness of God the Father. it just doesn't work, right? But they were given a glimpse of something. And then Moses draws closer to be up with this glory, this appearance of the glory of God, on top of the mountain. So we know that there is an angel, a messenger there. Was there more of the glory of God revealed there? Was it more than just the angel? It's hard to know all of those details, but this is the moment, and we went into this way more in depth in the last video on the Ten Commandments, where this is the moment that the Book of Jubilees really begins to talk about. It is the book. It's an extra biblical book. Some believe it's scripture. Some believe it's just interesting historical Hebraic writing, but it claims to be, in the book itself, the narration claims to be a book given from God to the angel to Moses, and that it is happening right on the mountain. And it's a really good read if you haven't been watching the videos. We pull in the pieces that connect to the Torah portions, but this is really the culmination of the of where this Book of Jubilees kind of takes place, right? So the angel on the mountain is telling Moses all of these things, gives him the history, gives him, what happened from the history of the world and creation and Adam and Noah and Abraham, and then through kind of retells the story of the Exodus, and then tells Moses, he gives Moses a glimpse of what is to come, and that the people actually don't honor their agreement to follow these commandments. So I won't talk about Jubilees much more. Watch the last portion. These really go together. The one on the Ten Commandments and this one really go together and are good companions. So, okay, 40 days, 40 nights with the Father, with the Creator of the world. What must that have been like to be that close to the presence? We know that like the face of Moses actually was shining after being that close to the Father. But also when Moses comes down from the mountain, God actually tells him the people are not doing what they should be doing. So we'll pick that up next week to see what happens when Moses comes down, and dig into that text a little bit more. But we have a prophet portion here in Jeremiah 34 that really relates to this. It's not a very uplifting prophet portion, but it really is, it gives us some insight on, again, the heart of God. So, verse 8, Jeremiah 34, verse 8. The word that came to Jeremiah from Yehovah after King Zedekiah had made a covenant with all the people in Jerusalem to make a proclamation of liberty to them, that everyone should set free his Hebrew slaves, male and female, so that no one should enslave a Jew, his brother. And they obeyed, all the officials and all the people who had entered into the covenant, that everyone would set free his slaves, male or female, so that they would not be enslaved again. They obeyed and set them free. But afterward, they turned around and took back the male and female slaves that they had set free and brought them into subjection as slaves. The word of Yehovah came to Jeremiah from Yehovah. Thus says Yehovah, the God of Israel, I myself made a covenant. Like, what are you making some covenant? I made a covenant with your fathers when I brought them out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, saying, at the end of 7 years, you must each set free the fellow Hebrew who has been sold to you and has served you 6 years. You must set him free from your service. But your fathers did not listen to me or incline their ears to me. You recently repented and did what was right in my eyes by proclaiming liberty to each to his neighbor. And you made a covenant before me in the house that is called by my name. But then you turned around and profaned my name when each of you took back his male and female slaves, whom you had set free according to their desire. You brought them back into subjection to be your slaves. Therefore, thus says Yehovah, you have not obeyed me by proclaiming liberty, every one to his brother and to his neighbor. Behold, I proclaim liberty to the sword. I proclaim to you liberty to the sword, to pestilence, and to famine, declares Jehovah. I will make you a horror to all the kingdoms of the earth, and the men who transgressed my covenant and did not keep the terms of the covenant that they made before me, I will make them like the calf that they cut in two and passed between its parts. The officials of Judah and the officials of Jerusalem, the eunuchs, the priests, and all the people of the land who pass between the parts of the calf, I will give them into the hand of their enemies and into the hand of those who seek their lives. Their dead bodies shall be food for the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth. And Zedekiah, king of Judah, and his officials, I will give into the hand of their enemies and into the hand of those who seek their lives, into the hand of the enemy of the king of Babylon, which was withdrawn from you. So Babylon had left, but they're going to come back, right? Behold, I will command, declares Jehovah, and I will bring them back to the city, and they will fight against it and take it and burn it with fire. I will make the cities of Judah a desolation without inhabitant. It's the heart of our Father, right? He's like, you're going to make an agreement together. Like the people were like, okay, let's all agree to do what God already told us to do. And he's like, I made the covenant with your fathers. You're ignoring the covenant I made with you. And this is why Judah winds up being ultimately, Babylon had already been there, had already like caused some issues, but Babylon was coming back and they would be decimated at this point, that there would be no one living there, no one to speak of living in the land. And it is because of this moment. It was because of slavery. It was because God said, I proclaimed liberty already, and you went back. You proclaimed liberty, you let your slaves go, and you were like, wait, no. And you went and took them all back. What did that look like? First of all, this was supposed to be it was supposed to be an agreed upon thing, right? That like if someone went into servitude in your household, it was a choice, right? They became a bondsman, a servant, a slave in your household for the allotted time, usually by choice, maybe sometimes because they owed money or had or were desperate and needed some kind of money. But there was choice involved. And certainly once you're free, you weren't supposed to go and take these people back by force, because the section we just read talked about how you are not to steal a person. So whatever the Bible says about slavery, you're not to steal people. So if you can't kidnap people, you certainly can't kidnap people to make them slaves. So whatever this servanthood and the slavery that was happening in the land of Israel, it wasn't go, okay, we set you all free, but now we're going to go gather you back up, um, obviously against your will if you have chosen to go free. So this is the Father's heart. Liberty is the Father's heart. Treating your neighbor as you want to be treated is the Father's heart. And because they did this, the people were taken into Babylon. It's a pretty big deal. Okay, we're ending up this week with Matthew 5, this section on the Sermon on the Mount. Yeshua, Jesus is speaking. There's a ton here. I'd love to go through all of Jesus's words here in Matthew, but read it in context in the chapters around it to get even more of this Sermon on the Mount. I feel like it's the Sermon on the Mount 2.0, right? Moses' sermon, God and Moses' sermon was the original one, and this is Jesus coming to give us some depth and meaning and clarity into the commandments of God. Okay, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until the heavens and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Because the scribes and the Pharisees weren't doing the commandments. that was the idea, right? They're relaxing some of the commandments. They're not following the commandments. They're talking about them, but they're not doing them. Um, and they're even putting their own laws and rules above the commandments of God, right? This paragraph seems really clear to me. I'm not sure how many Christians get it twisted. You have heard it said to those of old, you shall not murder. Whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. Whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. So if you are offering your gift at the altar and remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother and then come offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison, right? Like work out your issues before you go to the judge. Settle out of court when possible. Truly, I say to you, you will never get out till you have paid the last penny. You have heard it said that you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with a lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than your whole body go to hell. This is a huge paragraph. Yeshua is not coming to change the commandments, as he just said. He is coming to to remind us of the depth and meaning, to remind the people that it is about the heart, because it's always been about the heart. It's always been about how we treat each other, how we love one another. And so, yeah, adultery is wrong, but also being lustful is wrong, right? Um, being lustful is so wrong that it's not the person who is causing you to lust that needs to change, right? It is you. If you are lusting, you gouge out your own eye, or if your hands are causing you to sin, you cut off your hands. Clearly this is hyperbole, right? um, but Jesus uses hyperbole a lot to make a point, and sometimes, again, this is still missed. Do you know how often I've heard about modesty? I am a proponent of modest clothing for everyone. Modesty in the Bible, though, this is a quick aside. Modesty in the Bible is always talking about not flaunting your wealth. It is not talking about how much of a person's body should be covered. We should be dressing appropriately for the occasions to bring honor to our God, right? And to respect ourselves. We are to cover our nakedness. That is definitely a biblical commandment. But exactly what body parts can be shown, like can a shoulder be shown? Can ankles be shown? How about knees? How about elbows? We have tons of cultures and tons of denominations who will make rules about these things where the Bible did not, right? And then we talk about modesty as if it's the woman's burden to make sure a man never lusts. And I've heard these said from pulpits. It is not. I am here to tell you, not trying to condemn people who have made these sermons, but this section of scripture is clear. If you have a problem with what your mind is doing, you are responsible for your thoughts. You're responsible for your eyes. You're responsible for your hands. Let's not get it twisted, right? Wearing respectable clothing is good, but it is not the burden of another person to keep you from sinning. Sinning is about the heart, right? You can have, I mean, I live close to Amish country, and horribly, there are kidnappings and sexual assaults that happen in that community from outsiders. It's rarely inside, but from outsiders. And these women are dressed very plainly, very covered, right? They're not someone who wants to do harm because of lust. That's a them problem. Okay, coming back. Sorry, it's another one of my soapboxes. Okay, verse 31. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. We're going to stop again. Um, this is an important section. It's expounded on in a couple other places in the Gospels, but Jesus is asked about divorce a couple of times, and it comes up as this any cause divorce. It has to do with the verse in Deuteronomy. I want to say Deuteronomy 24. Correct me if I'm wrong. It might not be that passage, but there's a passage in Deuteronomy that talks about divorcing, giving your wife a certificate of divorce for any kind of immorality. It's really any kind of uncovering of nakedness or something. It's to be taken as sexual immorality. But because it says any kind there, of course, it gets all twisted by some of the rabbis and the houses of teaching in the time of Jesus. So the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai, they were going at one another. And I believe it's Hillel who was saying, you can divorce your wife for any reason. And that is what was happening. People were divorcing, giving their wives, sending them away because they just didn't like her anymore, because they didn't find her to be attractive or she got on their nerves. And this was a practice in Jesus's day. Remember, Jesus is talking to a people in a context. He's not speaking in a vacuum. And we have to be careful not to extrapolate everything that Jesus says and apply it to 21st century modern life, because it's different. Women can initiate divorce today. They couldn't in the time Jesus was speaking, right? Women were able to go free from marriage if there was if the husbands were not meeting those three things in Exodus 21 about providing food and clothing and marital conjugal rights. What would actually have to happen is, though, that there would be pressure, outside pressure on the man to give the woman divorce. She still couldn't legally get the divorce. She was free to go, but then the man was kind of pushed into giving her that divorce. It wasn't great for women. These laws were all askew. But we need to remember Jesus wasn't speaking in a vacuum. People were getting divorced for all kinds of reasons, and they were like nothing. They were not good reasons. And so this is what Jesus is speaking to here. That if you do that, if you divorce your wife for no reason, it's just like you're committing adultery and you're forcing her to commit adultery too. That's how serious it is to divorce your wife for no reason. So there's books on this subject. There's papers written on this subject. It's super interesting to me, like marital life and really the roles of women in first century ancient Near East. So there's lots on this if you're interested in this topic, but again, we have to be careful from taking Jesus's words to a specific people in a specific time about a specific practice and applying that to a time where our laws are very different and women have different rights, thank God, right? So we can't apply word for word, but we look for the heart of the matter. Like we do all through the scriptures, we look for the heart of God in what is being said. Okay. Again, you have heard it said, that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or earth, it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say simply be yes or no. Anything more than that comes from evil. Okay, we're going to stop again because this section is also talking to something specific in first century culture. In Judea, there was this, the different houses, the different rabbinical houses, the different, like say, denominations of the time were arguing about what you could swear by, and you could swear by heaven. Was that a stronger oath than swearing by the tabernacle or swearing by the earth or swearing by your own head? And there was literally fights and disagreements, and like, this is an oath that stands up because it's, an oath to God is mightier than the oath to your own head. It was This is what Jesus is speaking to here. Let your yes be yes and your no be no, because this little fight that you're having here is ridiculous. Again, context it really helps. And so knowing the history of this time period really helps understand the words of Jesus. So down here at verse 38, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, right? We just heard that said. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. That's not what the Torah says. So that's another thing. Let's stop right here. Last time I'm going to stop for the end. We have like 4 verses left. A lot of times Jesus will say, you have heard it said, and he'll be quoting a commandment. But also Jesus will say, you have heard it said, and he's quoting another rabbi. So the teachers come, and it's like, let's say denominations or different preachers or whatever have this idea and this interpretation, and some of them are right and some of them are not right. And so Jesus is correcting some of the incorrect preachings or teachings of the time. So when we have it here saying, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, this is a phrase not taught in the Torah. The Psalms do talk a little bit about punishing the enemy, maybe a lot actually, but there is no commandment from the mouth of God that says, hate your enemy. So when Jesus is saying, you have heard it said, he's quoting other rabbis or other understandings of teachings. Not He's not always quoting what the Bible says. So we have to be careful, and this is another reason why it's super, super important to know your word well, so that when Jesus is saying something, if he's quoting the Torah or not. We need to know. The New Testament is built on the foundation of the Hebrew scriptures, and if we don't know them, we're going to misconstrue things that Jesus says, and it happens often. We will get into this more and more as we go, but I mean, even just about the interaction with the Pharisees, giving Jesus a hard time about his followers not washing their hands. Great idea to wash your hands, not commanded for lay people to wash their hands before they eat. There's a ritual washing that happens with the priests, with the Levites in the temple, but there is no commandments to wash your hands before they eat. So when Jesus is saying and rebuking them, he's not breaking the commandments of God by not having his followers wash their hands. When you don't know the Torah, it's easy to think that Jesus came to say, the Torah is not super important. The instructions of God aren't as important as what I'm saying to you now. It's important to know the foundations of our faith. Okay, let's finish up. Okay, but I say to you, so you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemies. I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, and he sends rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You must therefore be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Love your enemies is not a New Testament idea. We just saw. If your enemy's ox runs away and you find him, return him to your enemy. It's an act of love. God is a God of justice. He's a God of mercy. His heart is that we treat others the way we want to be treated. And for some people get that all skewed, right? Some of us are not healthy and maybe we don't treat ourselves well. So to take out any of the confusion about how we should be treating others, God gives us instructions. And I'm going to call out some Christians right now. Used to be me. We have made it okay to put aside the written out instructions, and just love each other, right? Like we often talk about following Jesus is about loving God and loving each other, and that is true. But if your definition of love is different than my definition of love, then that's a problem. And if our definitions of love aren't the same as God's definition of love, then that's a problem. And so where do we go to learn? What does the Father's heart look like? What does he want for his people? That's what the scriptures are there for, to help us know God's heart and what God wants us to mimic, the behavior of God that we should be mimicking, and it's his heart for his people. So the instructions are good. They are there for our good. And of course, there are many things that we can't follow today, right? A ton of scripture has to do with the tabernacle and the sacrifices that are not applicable today. But there is a lot there that we can honor and that we already do honor. Um, in our daily life in order to be set apart people, showing the love of our Father to the world. They are to know us by our love, right? We want them to know us by our love. But what does love mean? How do we define love? God defines love for us in the Hebrew scriptures, in the Torah. His words tell us how to love him and how to love each other. So thanks for sticking with me, for hanging out through all of my tangents and soapboxes. Please tell me if anything didn't make sense, if you want to discuss anything a little further. If you disagree, let me know why. Let's discuss it in the comments. If you're new here, please subscribe to the channel. Share this with anyone who might find it edifying. Um, I'm looking to help get this channel to grow a little bit, unlock some fun stuff from YouTube when I have more subscribers. Um, like this video, comment, share it, subscribe, all the things. And I will see you. Have a blessed rest of your Sabbath, Shabbat Shalom. And I will see you next week with our next Torah portion called Teruma. And I'll see you then.